Welcome to Generation Digital Workforce, the podcast that's here to explore the role of robotic process automation and other digital technologies. Whether you're just getting started or you're looking for advanced strategies and tactics, if you're curious about where human and digital workers are coming together to transform the future of work, then this podcast is for you. All right, let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us this week for Generation Digital Workforce. This is Zena, and I am coming at you from Austin, Texas today. You're going to be really excited that you joined us because I have with me Ben from the Reveal Group. Hi Ben, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm really well, thanks.
Awesome. I did not want to attempt your last name, Ben, in fears that I might mispronounce it. So I'm going to let you do that. Why don't you introduce yourself, your customers, and tell us a little bit about the Reveal Group?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks very much, Zena. So my name is Ben Lingard. I'm a partner at Reveal Group. And Reveal Group is one of Blue Prism's very first kind of consulting partners. We specialize in RPA and intelligence automation across a whole range of different clients and customer bases across North America, across Asia Pacific. We have more than 100 customers and 25 different industries at last count. So we're very fortunate to have recently been named a Horses for Sources hot vendor. We're also recently double platinum with Blue Prism. And what that means is that we're one of the top delivery and capability partners with Blue Prism. So very happy to be here and to talk with you today about this exciting topic.
Well, we are really excited to have you. You are my first partner to interview on my podcast series. So a special welcome to you.
Thank you.
I was hoping that we could go back a little bit. RPA is first referenced as a business strategy back in 2012, almost a decade ago. I've only joined the industry about 2 years ago myself. How long have you been a part of it?
We've been in the industry for 6 years. So me personally, I was actually one of the very first people to learn about RPA and introduce it in the Australian market. So it's been a long time now.
All right. Okay. And where are you based?
I'm based in Washington, D.C., so as our business has grown, I relocated across to North America to help with some of that growth here.
Fantastic. I'm not sure if Washington is better than Australia. We'll have to take that conversation offline.
Maybe after winter we'll find out.
There you go. Well, so even though it's been around about a decade or so now, still only a small number of businesses are really utilizing it, or at least utilizing it to its full potential. Can you share your perspective on why this may be and what differences you might see, having now spanned two different geographies, both leveraging RPA, maybe in different ways, but maybe in quite similar ways as well?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think we saw a fairly slow uptake originally with RPA. I think there's a lot more customers that are certainly now experimenting and starting to roll out fully fledged RPA programs, intelligent automation programs. I think early on, there were a lot of customers that were sort of sitting back and waiting to see how things evolved. In speaking with a lot of our more recent clients, a lot of them say that they want to be more on the leading edge, but not the bleeding edge. So they wanted to kind of see how other organizations have started to roll out their programs, hopefully not learn things for the first times, but to be able to leverage a lot of kind of the experience and different capability that's now in the market. So I think some of the kind of barriers to entry are things like people not having availability to the technology or having to kind of start with sort of large programs. And I think we're sort of starting to see a little bit of a trickle down where people have more access to technology. A lot of the providers out there, including Blue Prism, are now offering cloud-based platforms. So it's not as big to kind of set up the technology side of things. Certainly in the market, a lot more access is being given to training and building up more of a community of available developers. So the actual skills that are available in the market are a lot deeper than they perhaps were as the technology was launched back in 2012. So we're starting to kind of see a lot of this typical sort of hype cycle happen where the initial kind of innovation was triggered. As you said, back in 2012 when the term RPA was coined, people kind of had like a lot of expectations out there a lot of kind of inflated type expectations around what I call the promise of RPA. We're now seeing a lot of customers start to kind of go through that sort of disillusionment and really start to find some kind of impact and benefits in the programs that they're starting to roll out. So whilst there are still a lot of people out there who haven't dabbled in RPA, I think there's a lot that are starting to, and a lot out there as well that are starting to look at their program and saying, we've experimented early, but there's a lot more opportunity to grow and to scale these across the organisation that they work within. So there's many kind of opportunities, I think, for this particular industry to continue to grow and to flourish as things progress.
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned earlier that you have some, 100 customers. Do you find that there are some businesses or industries that are more in the crosshairs for this type of intelligent automation than others?
I think that we took a little bit of an industry focus to start with. But what we found was across all types of industries, across all types of functions within those industries, there's essentially these repetitive, mundane, rules-based type tasks that we have people performing today that, looking at them, a lot of people are saying it should just be automated. So I think that certainly if we look at the 100 or so customers that we have, some of them fall in the financial services. We've seen a lot of uptake in financial services, insurance and so on quite early. We've also seen a lot of uptake in certain shared services functions within those organisations. So finance is a classic first mover in the RPA space, where there's a lot of kind of processes that lend themselves to be automated. But really, as we start to get into these organisations, so long as it meets the criteria of being able to be automated, so it's digital, it's repetitive, it's rules-based, then the question really is, how do organisations start to automate those processes? So I think there are some industries, but I think it has a lot more broad applicability than certainly we expected. As I said, we have customers now from over 25 different industries, so it certainly has broad applicability.
That's interesting, that broad applicability, almost like CRM kind of back in the day, where really every business needs to be doing this. So I'm curious.
Absolutely. There's a lot of parallels, I think, to CRM and the rise of CRM as there is to RPA.
Interesting. So I'm curious, we hear a lot of people talk about bots, about robots, about digital workers. That's, of course, the vernacular that, Blue Prism and our partners use. What is a digital worker really to you? We have a little listeners out there that probably can't really put a description to that. Can you help them?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think the easiest way for me to really think about digital worker and how they work is that they're actually very similar to our human workforce. So organisations have a human workforce that do various tasks. Some of them involve receiving things like emails and processing attachments and launching applications and verifying things and comparing different data and sending responses and so on. So a digital worker actually does that exact same process in the same way that a human does today. So they emulate what people do. They have access to business applications. There's an element of training the digital worker to understand how to perform a process. And ultimately, they need change management just like people do. So if there's a change to a process, a change to a system, then our digital workers need to also understand what those changes are to be able to accommodate those. Digital workers themselves generally start off by doing fairly kind of simple type tasks that don't necessarily have a lot of logic. They have very clear business rules, but they can be used in fairly complex tasks as well as they kind of develop additional skills. So it's very similar kind of the parallel to the human workforce and the digital workforce. So I guess what we see in organisations is that they have their human workforce. Some organisations may have offshore resources that also support the processes that they perform or support customer interactions and so on. And we see this as just a different type of labour that's used in organisations and will continue to kind of grow and do a lot more of those kind of mundane, repetitive tasks as the industry matures.
That's interesting. You are second or third guest on my program that's mentioned this idea of onshore, offshore. which really is this, shift in labor force. So I'm curious,
Yeah.
how ubiquitous do you think a digital workforce will be in the future? Maybe on a near term, let's say 5 years, but then, in the distant future, do you foresee that all companies would have the need for digital workers in addition to their human workforce?
Yeah, well, so I think the prevalence of a digital workforce will certainly increase across customers. I think that it'll almost be a paradigm shift or a cultural adoption across organizations that think about things in terms of, we have a new process or we have an existing process. Do I get a person to do it? Do I give it to an offshore resource, or do I give it to a digital worker? So in a lot of the use cases, they're not focused, that we work on aren't simply focused on replacing the processes that people do today. A lot of them are focused on dreaming up new possible processes, or, the art of the possible is a term that's used fairly frequently in this space. So thinking about kind of new ways we can approach challenges that we have, or new services that we can offer to customers that are all enforced and enabled by this digital workforce, is certainly something that we see more frequently, and something that we expect to become more ubiquitous in across organizations and across industries. So some of our clients, for example, instead of hiring 200 temporary staff to perform a process in a particular month of the year every single year, where you have to train up a workforce, they simply train a fleet of digital workers. They're all competent. They all perform the process the exact same way each and every time, and they're ready to go up and ready to scale up or scale down as needed. So it's certainly, I think, a key competitive advantage for clients that are embracing the use of a digital workforce. But it's not to say that there isn't still very much a human element to all of the processes that organizations perform as well. And I think sort of that the idea that I see is that the digital workforce does a lot of that repetitive, mundane tasks, as I've said, whereas our humans are being released to do what's more classically human, and the processes that are better suited to humans.
Yes, I know I don't enjoy data entry. It's a work I often try to offload to my 16-year-old, but he is also not very good at it, being that he is a 16-year-old boy. So he's got other
Yeah,
things on his mind.
he'll have to automate the task for you then.
Exactly. It would be brilliant. So, do you have any digital workers on your team?
We do employ digital workers on our team as well. So the way that we actually employ them is to help respond to some of our training academy requests. So when people submit different solutions to be graded, we actually have a digital worker who's performing different checklists as part of those solutions. So we kind of aren't just, we practice what we preach, and we also employ digital workforce as well. And it's funny you kind of mentioned that, because if you look at the process of automation itself, it lends itself to automation. So if you look at kind of how you go about delivering a process, there's very clear kind of process that you follow. It's standard, so every single process gets delivered in the same way. It uses the same artifacts to support it. So what we're actually starting to see is this whole theme of automating the automation. So it's a little bit like Inception, where you have kind of digital workers building digital workers and processes and so on, which is kind of interesting.
Very interesting, and maybe just a little too far into the future for some of our listeners,
The
but we'll
Skynet.
all get there. We'll all get there together. One of the questions that we do get from our listeners is, can you give us examples of the real value that the digital workforce is delivering today? Can you, without necessarily naming any customers, can you walk us through a customer story? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think where we have seen customers be quite successful in this is actually where I think a lot of customers need to start is actually understanding their why for RPA. So why are they deciding that they want to do RPA, and really setting the vision for their program? I think sort of one of the very first steps is making sure that they understand why they want to embark on this journey in introducing a digital workforce, because it really helps to understand what sort of target processes that they will look to deliver. It helps to assess whether or not they've been successful and those kind of things. So some of our customers embark on their RPA journey for different reasons. Some of them start with using quality as the number one pillar in their vision, where they want to be able to really focus on areas where they have quality issues for their customers, and they want to be able to improve those by introducing a digital worker that performs the process in a standard way to a high degree of quality each time. Other customers want to introduce a digital workforce to improve customer experience by offering more real-time type services to them. And others are looking at more traditional kind of cost-saving type approaches as well. So there's a kind of spectrum, I guess, of customers that we've interacted with that are looking for various things from their RPA program. What I'd say, the customers that have been the most successful in scaling their programs and achieving a really high impact are the ones that actually have a dual speed of automation. So the first speed is kind of looking at these kind of transformational type projects. So instead of just looking at how do I automate this one step in a process that takes things from this screen and enters it into this screen, starting to look at more how does a customer interact with our organization, and how do we go all the way through the process to when a customer is finished that interaction, or we've produced a service, or we've produced a product for that customer. So the first speed is really looking at how you can use your digital workforce on that kind of end-to-end customer journey. And the sorts of impacts are things like increasing the turnaround time on mortgage processing from 15 or 20 days, reducing down to almost an instant kind of response for an approval of a mortgage and so on. So there's kind of real impacts in that transformational type space. But the second speed that those customers that have been successful in this have operated at, looking at more of the smaller processes as well. So they're looking at kind of, I like to say that it's the long tail of automation. It's all of the smaller processes that really make up the processes that our people do today. So collectively, they're quite large, but individually, they're quite small. And the customers that I guess have had an impact is looking at how they can empower people from the business to actually start automating those kind of processes. So looking at how you can train somebody up to use the software and to automate a particular task they do in the day. And the sorts of impacts that has had is more from like a cultural impact. So the people look at those for things like job satisfaction. So they're able to control their own destiny to a certain extent, and be able to automate the tasks they don't like doing instead of either complaining about them or waiting for IT to get around to them on the enhancement log. So I think that the impact, there's a lot of talk about sort of the impact being financial and cost cutting, but I think that it's a little bit short-sighted, and there's so many other impacts and benefits that introducing a digital workforce can have for an organization.
That's a very interesting concept to think about, focusing both from the strategic transformational perspective, but not forgetting about the long tail and the little bits, the busy work, right? That all of us really spend time doing. It's that urgent, non-strategic stuff, that quadrant that seems to take up a lot of our time, but really doesn't deliver value back to the business.
Yeah, exactly. Firefighting is a lot of the work that people go through. So if you can automate some of the firefighting, then it certainly allows people to focus on what they're good at and the things that are important to the business and growing the business.
Yes. How beneficial is it for everyone? Win-win for everyone all the way around. You mentioned something there that was quite interesting, and that is that you're seeing customers where the human workers, if you will, are learning how to use the software and, building their digital counterparts to some extent, to paraphrase a bit. So what other changes are you seeing going on in these human workforces as they're, not only getting digital workers, but also conceiving of them and now building them? And is that take a developer? Because it sounds like it, from your description that it's really something a business person can do.
Yeah, so I think there's a few kind of trends, I guess, that we're seeing, and one is really this rise of the citizen developer as the industry has now adopted the term. And I think that if you look at why RPA was introduced, a lot of the reason it was introduced was to empower the business to actually control and automate a lot of the work and the processes that they own and they perform. So the idea was that instead of lodging an enhancement request to an IT department to fix a system or to build a link between one system and another system, it really just empowered them to automate that end-to-end process a lot more simpler and to do that themselves. To your question, I guess, about the skill set required for people to be able to deliver an automated solution, I think that the skill set really, particularly in Blue Prism, isn't about having a coding degree or, attending university to study this kind of stuff over a number of months. It's really about kind of going through a training course. And as I said, the availability of training resources across platform and in the market today is phenomenal. You can jump online and there's a community that you can ask different questions to and get help on. So really the skills that are required are people who have problem solving skills, people who can think in kind of a logical, sequential type way, generally people who are able to map out processes or have built your process instruction documents and so on. So I think the sort of technical barrier to entry for people being developers in this space has reduced considerably over time. And I think it's only going to continue to decrease as well. So there's things like app stores out there. So Blue Prism has their digital exchange, which allows you to kind of download these pre-built building blocks. So you don't have to even start from scratch in your processes and building the automations anymore. You're able to kind of leverage this community and jumpstart your whole delivery in that sense. So I think, the whole citizen developer is becoming a lot more of a concept that we're seeing across our customer base, and certainly a trend that we're seeing.
Digital workers opening up new career paths for their human colleagues. I love it. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You were talking about when digital workforces are first brought on, they're usually doing fairly simple, routine things, and then you mentioned adding skills to them and then being able to do more, bigger, more intelligent tasks. Can you tell us, dig into that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, sure thing. So the way that I sort of like to visualize it is that I see RPA almost being kind of, the hands of the digital worker, where it's kind of replicating the different kind of mouse clicks and keystrokes and selection of fields and those kind of things that our people do today. So we can sort of train them as though we would an entry-level employee to an organization that starts out on those kind of basic rules-based type tasks. But as they start to become more mature and we see customers kind of develop a very strong understanding in that, that's where we start to sort of see the adoption and introduction of other complementary technologies. So our digital workers start to require things like visual perception when they are receiving kind of scanned documents or receiving things like invoices, where they need to actually recognize where the invoice number is and where the date is and where the amount is. And those kind of things are being introduced to our digital workers through skills like OCR and intelligent optical character recognition and so on. So that's kind of one of the additional skills. But then you start to have different brain power and thought. So you've got kind of things like sentiment analysis or machine learning and some of those technologies that are able to kind of process more unstructured data for the digital worker to be able to start to interpret things and make decisions on things. So we're kind of seeing this sort of evolution of the digital worker, if you like, that's becoming more able to do additional processes and more complex processes. And that's, I think, where we were speaking a little bit about impact earlier. And that's where I think we're seeing kind of more of the transformational impact, where no longer is it just kind of the digital worker that does the basic type activities. Where a lot of organizations are getting to now is where they're really empowering this digital worker with this whole set of skills to perform more of an end-to-end process and deliver better kind of outcomes for customers.
What's the most clever digital worker that you've met, so to speak?
Yeah, well, good. That's a good question. So there are a couple of examples, I guess, from our clients. One of the ones I particularly like is using some visual perception in one of our airline clients. So one of our airline clients uses real-time camera screening to check whether or not planes have arrived at the gate. And that triggers a whole host of different functions that then happen. So things like catering. So instead of having your catering team drive to the gate and wait for the plane to arrive to the gate, you can actually trigger it in a more real time to say the plane's just arrived using visual. And then that triggers off a whole host of different actions that happen in the catering team to get things ready and to get things over to the plane and so on. So that was one of the cooler things that I've seen using visual perception.
Oh, I love it. So that they don't just have to sit on the tarmac like sometimes the rest of us do. So I'd like to ask you a question about being a business leader and and owning a team that it has both human and digital workers. You mentioned earlier you have a team mate who does test checking for you, which grading of papers. So that's very clever, and I'm sure many teachers across the United States would love to have that person on their team as well. But if you're a business leader out there listening, what should they be thinking about right now as they're thinking about how to build or grow this new digital human team?
Yeah, I think that it's a really important question that sort of extends a little bit on what I was saying about understanding the why for automation, because I think once you actually understand why it is that you're embarking on the automation journey, you can start to communicate that out to people. So I think really, fundamentally, it's a change management type program that you're introducing to any organization as you start to roll out a digital workforce. So if you're really clear and understand why you're embarking on that journey, then you can communicate quite clearly to your team about kind of the expectations of the program and be transparent and in that communication as well, which I think is a really high priority. I think that there's a sort of cultural adoption piece that happens in most of our customers. And you can usually tell when it happens because people start referring to RPA as a bit more of a verb as opposed to it being a noun, being a thing. So people start referring to let's RPA it, or let's, automate it, or let's. So there's a real kind of, cultural adoption point where people start thinking about, how they can apply this technology. So I think as a business leader, firstly, being very clear and transparent and open about why you're embarking on the automation, and then really encouraging people to embrace that change, encouraging people to learn the new skill as well. So as we spoke about, there's a whole heap of new skills out there for people to learn. There's new kind of roles and descriptions that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, and new career paths for our people that exist out there today. So I think that those are kind of some of the things that business leaders should think about, particularly as they're starting out on their journey. Are those kind of things.
Excellent. Excellent, Ben. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I hope you have as well. Is there any other closing thoughts or thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with?
I don't think so. I think that people should certainly embrace the digital workforce. As you and I had the conversation, I think it was last week or the week before, there are so many different opportunities out here and so many different jobs that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago today. So data scientists and social media. So this is really just kind of a continuation of something that's been happening over and over again, and certainly something that shouldn't be feared but should be embraced by everyone. So I'm hoping that all of the listeners are able to kind of relate to some of what we've said today and able to use that as they embark on their own journey or as they continue and scale their journey within the RPA industry.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very happy to be part of this new generation digital workforce as we've chosen to characterize it here. And I'm glad you're part of it too, Ben. Before we go, we've reached the part in the show where I like to call it the Xena Zinger. This is a question that we haven't chatted about before, but it's all fun and easy, so no worries. But if a digital worker was an athlete, what type of athlete would it be and why?
I think it would have to be firstly, I like the concept of the Xena Zinger, it's great, but I think it would have to be probably a marathon runner. And the reason why I think it's a marathon runner is that the digital worker has kind of this long journey to travel. And there will probably be different pains that marathon runner has along the way, and times where, that things don't go according to plan, and we need to make sure that marathon runner, just like our digital workforce, has kind of the nutrients they need to get all the way to the end. But I think in the last kind of bit of that journey as well is really where, the digital worker, and in this case the marathon runner, starts to really sprint and make an impact. So I think a marathon runner if a digital worker was a person or an athlete.
Love it. And on that note, I bid my listeners farewell. Thank you for joining us today. Ben, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And I look forward to everyone joining us next time for our Generation Digital Workforce podcast. Have a lovely day, Ben.
Thank you very much, you too.
You've been listening to Generation Digital Workforce. If you want to hear more about RPA, AI, and other cognitive technologies that are shaping the future of work, join us next time as we continue to go deeper on these topics with industry innovators and experts. To make sure you never miss a future episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. And if you've liked what you heard today, please leave us a review. It's one of the best ways to help more people find valuable content. For show notes and more info, visit us at blueprism.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.